before we officially get started, welcome. This is an amazing event. Geez. Before I introduce the amazing writer of the hour, one fresh news update. This just in. So if you don't know about our program or know a lot about our program, we have a couple of prestigious scholarships we award students, and one of which is the Cicero Scholarship. It's the Cicero Memorial Scholarship, started by the friends and families of Giro Cicero, who was a student here at Queens College. A passionate writer, his legacy lives on through the recipients of this scholarship through the Cicero family. And I'm happy to announce, I just learned, that our own Amanda Lovix has been and she is in my translation workshop, which is in attendance today. So happy to honor her fantastic work. And now to our fantastic writer, a quick Rebecca introduction. I'm reading on my phone like the cool kids do. Like nobody brings their paper anymore. So I'm especially delighted to introduce tonight's reader. Before I do, since we have current and former Queens College MFA students in attendance, including my translation workshop, I want to say a word about the Loose Translation Prize. It's the award Rebecca won that brought her awesome book to publication. Open to current and former Queens College MFA students, this award features publication of a full-length translation book from any language and in any genre by Hanging Loose Press. One of the leading independent presses in New York City for over half a century, Hanging Loose remains committed to highlighting contemporary, cutting-edge literature from marginalized voices. For over 15 years now, we've had recipients working from a variety of languages, genres, from Italian drama to German prose. Their first books, many of our great translators, started with the Loose Translation Prize, including Ann Poston, who's become quite a name in translation. Please contact me as the prize coordinator for more information. You don't have to be on the translation track, and you can apply for this as long as you want to outside of the program. And I also want to shout out my colleagues tonight. First and foremost, distinguished Professor Kamiko Han, who had the amazing idea to start this award with Hanging Loose back in the day. This was her first poetry press. I'm also seeing, this is just Jason Tugau, our MFA director, our fantastic coordinator, John Rice, who does so much, Jeff Casvan sitting in the back row, and then Duncan Faraday in front of him. Fantastic, welcome. So as Rebecca will tell you, her book as last year's winner became an issue with translation rights. It took a radical turn towards original writing. In this respect, I think it's an especially important book for this prize, as well as for the field of translation. Recently, esteemed translation theorist Lawrence Venuti, who I once brought to our program to give a talk, reached out to me asking about my perceptions of what I think is changing in translation pedagogy and translation creative writing programs. If you don't know, Venuti back in the day was instrumental in criticizing the domestication of foreign texts, meaning translated books stopped sounding like the original source language and became too anglicized, Americanized, right? So, and I got to reflecting. I don't know if he's working on a new book, Venuti, but he's just taking one of people that teach translation thoughts. So over the last few years especially, I replied that at least from my perspective, the forgotten space between source and target text, what do we even call it, has been allowed, even encouraged to become visible. More than merely advocating for the translators to be included on their book covers, which thankfully happens quite a bit now, their interventions as fellow artists doing the hard, and let's get this, creative work of translation has come to matter. I commend to you as support of my claim the pithy chapbook put out by Ugly Duckling Press, Say Translation is an Art, of which my colleague Anne-Marie Drury and I have become fans, and if I'm not mistaken, also appeared on Rebecca Suzuki's reading list for her thesis. Yes. So wrapping up, to show just how generative translation remains for the creative writer, and to make a case for foregrounding the forgotten space between texts, it was Rebecca's experiments with responding to her own translations of a contemporary Japanese short fiction writer in Jason Tugau's creative nonfiction course that first shifted her into this project. As I shared last week with my class, the best compliment I could give Rebecca on what started to become an amazing MFA thesis was that as a fellow writer and translator, I found myself artistically jealous of just how radically she'd been broken open. Her regular submissions of her thesis drafts had me at times even forgetting I was reading a thesis. I simply got lost in her transformation of good writing into rather lyrical, at times I'd say exquisite prose. I can tell you such an explosion of creativity where when we begin to find and develop our voices doesn't always happen in a single semester or even during one's time in an MFA program. But since this event constitutes tonight's translation workshop, I think Rebecca is a good case study on how sustained discipline, along with frequent permission to take new creative risks, ultimately does pay off in ways that can even surprise us. And with that, I'll read Rebecca's brief bio, and I'll cheat and go paper. So Rebecca Suzuki is the author of When My Mother Is Beautiful, Hanging Loose Press, winner of the 2023 Loose Translation Prize. She writes creative nonfiction in a mixture of forms and languages, and she often writes about identity, home, family, lineage, immigration, Asian Americanism, language, translation, and more. Her work has also been published in various journals and magazines. When she is not writing creative nonfiction, she is translating poems or contemporary prose from Japanese to English. She earned her MFA in literary translation and creative writing from Queens College, and she is a lecturer of English here. You can find more information at her website, RebeccaSuzuki.com. And with that, I give you Rebecca.
Thank you, Roger, for that really beautiful introduction. I don't even know what to say. And also just the fact that, you're my thesis advisor and I took so many classes with you that I loved, and to be sitting here together to have a conversation about a book that I published is just so incredible. So thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. And it just feels so special to be able to do this at QC, which is where I now work. So just a lot of feelings. So thank you. And also special shout out to my mom and my sister who are here. This book is dedicated to the two of them. And obviously it's called When My Mother Is Most Beautiful. So she is beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna start with the very first entry, and it is called Mokohang. When I was umareta, my mother traced over the bluish bruise spot on my back, Mongolian spot. Was she checking for common ancestry despite having just birthed me, the umbilical cord sliced right in front of her? Was she feeling energy from all who were alive before me, before us, our only marker, this bluish hue that eventually disappears from our backs? As my mother traces my mokohan, does she see burial grounds of all who have passed? Does she see in the blue a moon, a spot in the sky, proving her existence eventually disappeared? The next piece I'll read is called A Mother's Beauty. My mother says that she regrets many things that she said to her mother. My mother says that there are things she only understood about her mother when she became a mother herself, but it was too late at that point. She was already gone. My mother had to watch her mother die not long after giving me life. When my mother and I passed by ginkgo trees, either in the summer when their fan-shaped leaves are green or in the fall when they're yellow and begin covering the ground below like carpet, my mother likes to tell me that only some of the trees make ginnan. She notes that she hardly ever sees ginnan on American ginkgo trees and wonders why. It's only the female ginkgo trees that produce ginnan, though they need sperm from the male trees to produce them. The nuts have a pungent smell. Some describe it as dog poop, others as vomit, and others as stinky cheese. Whatever its comparison, the smell is noticeable, and this is probably the reason we hardly see any ginnan on our walks. A friend tells me that he's seen female ginkgo trees being chopped down in the middle of the night. He tells me also of a female tree with a hole drilled through it, kept alive by the two male trees next to her. A dying female tree forcibly kept alive by the male trees that cannot stop producing pollen or sperm, whatever. Ginkgo belongs to to the ginkgo aliis order, which appeared over 270 million years ago. Ginkgos are descended from trees that used to feed and shelter dinosaurs. 6 ginkgo trees are known to have survived the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. My mother tells me that her mother loved ginnan. She loved it so much, in fact, that one time she ate too many. It's unclear how many she ate, but afterwards she felt nauseous and had a nosebleed. To cook ginnan, you have to first put a crack in its tough whitish outer shell and slowly roast it on a pan. Once roasted and peeled from both its outer shell and thin inner shell, the nut is light green like a peeled grape, somewhere between the color of a ginkgo leaf in the summer and a ginkgo leaf in the fall. When you bite into the gummy-like nut, you initially taste its slight sweetness or bitterness, but are then hit with a burst of umami comparable to the shock of biting into a piece of camembert. I've only tried it a few times, the one sitting at the bottom of chawanmushi, and I'm still getting used to its punch. You're not supposed to eat more than 10 ginnan at once because the nut can cause ginkgo toxin poisoning. Its symptoms include stomachache, nausea, vomiting, nervous irritability, convulsions, and sometimes death. This means my grandmother was poisoned, at least a little bit. My mother says that her mother got the nosebleed from the ginnan because they're too good for you, too filled with nutrients. The body doesn't know how to handle that. When I pass ginkgo trees, I think, this is the perfect tree. When I pass ginkgo trees, I think, be careful with beauty. The next piece I'm going to read is called Neck Support. When I try to heal myself from pain, I become idle and stuck like I'm living inside a bottle of glue. When my body is wrecked with a heavy stone, first falling on top of me and then somehow entering me for me to carry at the bottom of my stomach, I feel so heavy and stay far from everywhere. I don't want to do. This morning, I dragged my body to the bathroom to wash myself and to brush my teeth, and in the time that I spent staring at the sad in my eyes, my mother placed a single flower in a water-filled glass bottle and put it on my desk. I'd seen the same flower earlier in a big vase, in a family of flowers sitting on top of the dining table as I had my breakfast. Her neck was bending from the weight of her heavy petals, and I'd asked myself, does she know how I feel? But my mother had healed her, given her neck support, the first motherly instinct. My mother says one thing to me when I notice the flower in my room, hana wa saku. My mother is the only person who knows how I've been all my life. The next piece is called We Followed You, Son. We followed you, son, with the Boeing 757 or 737 or whatever those giant planes are called, as we flew and flew and flew across a bed of blue, shimmering like forbidden gems, convincing us that the world is beautiful, at least from above it is. And somewhere on that bed of blue, language shifted, and all of a sudden, the world I thought I knew, the umi and sora and taiyo, took themselves apart, one stroke at a time, dissipating into the air somewhere. Where did they go, the strokes? I couldn't follow them because Boeings are too fast, and we were in a rush to get to New York City, even though I never wanted to go to New York City. You, the sun, taiyo, you didn't go anywhere. I followed you, my eyes narrowing, tiring from the brightness, but I would have disappeared if I stopped looking at you. So I kept my eyes on you, and you said, I'll be here no matter what. The strokes of your letters are gone, but I'm not. Call me by whatever name you choose. And so I did. I trusted you, even though you hurt me, you hurt my eyes. And when our tired, grumbling plane finally touched down on the smooth gray tarmac of JFK, you were gone. The brightness replaced by a blanket of black outside the tiny window and inside the cylinder where we all share the same oxygen. For over 14 hours, I could no longer breathe, and I remember what you had told me, and I called out to Taiyo, but nobody answered, and so I said louder, Taiyo, Taiyo, which is gibberish in English, and somebody hushed me from somewhere inside, and I was told to just close my eyes and relax and accept this dark, silent space. The next piece is called Lonely. I read in a book that summer in Japan is very lonely, And I wonder if summer in Japan is very lonely because it's after the sakura have fallen. When the petals have been reabsorbed by the ground underneath and the momoiro is replaced by the green of its leaves. But after moving to America, summer was the only time I could visit Japan. The first time we visited, I must have been around 12, my sister 9. We took the plane by ourselves because our mother had to work, and we stayed at my aunt's house for around a month. On the hot evenings when we went to sleep with the crickets chirping beyond the window screens, I would think to myself, we're closer than we think. I fly for half a day and I'm already here. Why was I so worried? Nothing had disappeared while I was gone. Everything had stayed in place, and there was still space for me. But on the day we went back to the airport to board our flight back to America, the ocean stretched limitlessly, and I suddenly became afraid that the space I thought I had was imagined. We all cried together at the airport. It began with my sister, then me, then my cousins, then even my aunt. We said, it's okay, we'll see each other next year. But we knew this was just an attempt to reassure us. We knew that these words could be empty, that there was no guarantee we'd see each other the next year. We were just preparing to live without each other again, to be left dealing with empty space and silence. I was constantly made to wonder, but how do you live with your heart in two different places? At 12, it felt impossible. The only plausible thing to split my body into two. Now, when I leave Japan, I'm not hit with the same sadness. I don't know what that means. Has adulthood blocked some of those emotions? Is my heart not split evenly anymore? Have I accepted the fact that there isn't space in Japan for me anymore? But do I have space in America? Summer in Japan is very lonely. The next piece is called My Mother Stopped Taking the Subway in 2020. My mother stopped taking the subway in 2020 after reading article after article after article about the attacks, the beatings, the murders of Asian people, the ones that look like the image she see in the mirror as she prepared to go out. For a while, she'd wear a hat and a mask whenever she went outside. Maybe they wouldn't see that I'm Asian this way, she'd say, like it wasn't really a big deal, like it was just a minor inconvenience. This is totally not okay, I'd say to her, but she'd simply shrug and say, well, if I don't like it, I can go back, right? Back? Back to where? Japan. 日本に帰ればいいんでしょ? I feel an urgency, but I can't quite place that urgency. What is the urgency? Or maybe the question is, where do I begin? No, that's not how this works. You're American, I tell her. Oh, am I? I don't know. You are. Okay, she says before adjusting her hat in the mirror by the door, letting me know she's late. She looks at me, the bitter American, smiles reassuringly, and waves goodbye. Just a couple more pieces. Next piece is called 日本語は私の頭の中で生きている. One day in elementary school, a friend asked me, why do you keep calling it papuru? It's murasaki-iro. Japanese was my first language, but I'd learned some words only in English, like the way I've called my aunt auntie all my life, or I've never referred to spinach as horenso. But now it's the opposite, and Japanese creeps up a lot when I'm trying to speak English. I can't do multiplication in English because I memorized the times table in Japanese. Sometimes I accidentally say, you can go, the light's blue instead of green, because in Japanese we say ao instead of midori, even though traffic lights in Japan are also red, yellow, and green. The first traffic signal in Japan was introduced in 1930 on the crossroad of Hibiya, Tokyo. At first, drivers and pedestrians did not know what each color symbolized, but the reason Japanese people refer to the colors as red, yellow, and blue is that in the Japanese language, blue encompasses a wider range of colors than in English. For example, green vegetables are referred to as aoyasai, or blue vegetables, and green leaves are referred to as aona, or blue leaves. It also made sense for Japanese people for the three traffic lights to be the three primary colors. So even though the word for green existed in Japanese, they still called green light blue light. I thought that was it. No further research necessary. But then it was pointed out to me recently after I showed this writing to someone who has spent some time in Japan that the green light on a traffic light in Japan is actually bluer, almost a turquoise color. I immediately looked up traffic lights in Japan in comparison to the US on Google Images to confirm, and indeed, the signals in Japan have a bluish tint. Initially, Japanese traffic lights were green, much like the traffic lights in the US. However, the country's official traffic documents still referred to green traffic lights as ao because of the way the language includes shades of green as blue, as stated earlier. As time passed, though, midori became more widely used to refer to green, and so Japanese linguists began objecting their government's decision to continue using ao to describe what was clearly midori. In a way to compromise, the Japanese government mandated through a cabinet order that traffic lights use the bluest shade of green possible. Still technically green, but noticeably blue enough to justify continue using the ao nomenclature. So, although the traffic lights in Japan look turquoise or almost completely blue, the government assures us it's actually just a very blue shade of green. Green enough to satisfy international regulations, blue enough to still be called ao. Wild, that language had such an influence that it made even the government compromise. Who says language isn't power? And the last piece I'll read is the last entry. It's called A Haibun About Moon, My Mother, and Me. She and I, the moon, and Rebecca, Tsuki to Rebecca. We stare at each other across the 238,855 miles in between us. Did you know that the moon is getting further away from the Earth each year? What should we make of that? Her glow leaking into the Hudson River below, I run out to the balcony of my apartment to see her without the glass window between us. The nighttime air tries to swallow me into its darkness, wrapping me up slowly from all sides, but I stand firm, my feet planted on the floor. I look at her even though I know she cannot see me, and I whisper, "Thank you." Thanking the moon is something I've inherited. Whenever my mother sees her shining like a silver coin in the sky, she claps her hands twice, then puts her palms together in front of her, bows, and closes her eyes to say a little prayer. Nammandabu, kyou mo arigatou. So like my mother, I thank the moon for being the lone shining guide in the dark sea, and for being so beautiful, and for pulling and pushing the tide, and for coming back again. But more than that, maybe, for shifting shape, for being the piece of the nail after it's been clipped, a half-eaten pizza pie, a seashell, a slice of orange, a croissant, a shrimp, a dumpling, but still being the moon. Because I, too, am so many things, but still me. I'm constantly shifting shapes, being called hundreds of different names in all languages. Otsuki-sama arigatou. Thank you, moon. After releasing a sigh, I go back inside, enter the warmth of my apartment again, rejoice in the beauty I've just witnessed, and think to myself, as long as the moon is here, I will not disappear. And I walk over to the kitchen where my mother is standing by the sink, gently washing rice with her fingertips. The rice she scooped out of the huge bag of California grains we bought and carried from Mitsuwa, the Japanese grocery store we moved to be closer to. When I tell her about the moon, she pauses briefly, looks into my eyes, and smiles. Mita yo, kirei da ne, she tells me. She is here. I am here. We are both here. Here, anywhere, under the moon. She sees in the moon a spot in the sky, proving our existence marked. Thank you.